On today's show, we explore the enigma that is design systems versioning. How do we make sense of versioning? How do you sync versions between code design and documentation? Maybe it's easier to ignore versioning? Probably not. I'm Luke Murphy, and I'm joined by my co host, Michelle Chin. We're both advocates at zeroheight, the design system management platform, and this is Design Systems WTF. Episode number 23. Can't believe we've already done 23 of these. That's like half a year's worth. No, we do it monthly. No, we do it fortnightly. I've got no idea. That is basically a year's worth.
It is, yeah.
I'm just rambling. I'm just coming fresh off vacation as well, so it's I should be refreshed, but instead, I think Ireland has a lot to answer for just grinding me down. It was very wet, rainy. Um, anyway, versioning very important. so
Yeah, I guess, like, should we version? Maybe,
yeah,
maybe.
well, I mean, yeah, should we version? I think that I mean versioning should be a standard, right? Like unless you're
Yeah.
dealing with a very small design systems, I don't think there's many cases where you shouldn't have some level of versioning. How official that is and how robust it is probably another um question. I don't know. But I suppose for you, like, how did you approach versioning back when you were in the land of corporate design systems?
When I was in the trenches,
Yeah.
um, we looked at it and I don't know, I think we got too complicated because you can think about everything having a version, right? So, coded components in the library, like, you, like, submit PRs, they get approved, versions get updated to your, like, storybook, and then, in Figma, you can do some versioning and just, like, I guess, yeah, there's, like, in the design system documentation, you can version that, like, other code libraries, all this and that was, like, getting the app could get versioned. It got really gnarly, and then I think understanding versions, right? Like, the semantic, like, the naming convention was also really hard for a lot of people. Maybe not so hard for the developers, but very hard for designers who were used to just versioning things as final, 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 final. So,
Well, I mean,
um,
I think this is one of the advantages of Figma these days is those days are hopefully approaching being behind us. But
yeah,
it
for
is
sure.
it is one of those things that I think that like it's a concept that I think is very natural for developers. Because like even things like package versioning and being able to like put out different packages as different versions and saying which one is the stable release, which one's like the beta release, and like all the rest of it. Like that is something that conceptually is very known to them, not simple, but known. Whereas for designers, like I remember, back in the day, even trying to implement abstract with the design team and have like our design files versioned. And it was just like it was a nightmare to even get them to understand the concept of like branching and versioning. So when you're trying to do
Yes.
that across a team that is, a mix of like disciplines, it is a little bit of a nightmare. I mean, did you find a way to get through in the end to like a good point, or did you just go, nope, screw this, I'm out. Hey, zero height.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I exited. No, I think we looked at it and then we started to get, like, way into our heads, and it just got way too and we're like, "Why are we doing all this?" Because, like, why don't we just look at versioning from, like, a very holistic level, like, at the documentation level?
Yeah,
Um, so that way it was easy. Because otherwise, I think the biggest thing is, like, we were trying to align version numbers, with design libraries and code libraries, but say there was a mistake in the code library because they, made the border like 2 pixels instead of 1 pixel or something, and so they'd have to go back and fix that, and that would be another version, but, like, that was never a problem in the design, and so then it's off sync, right? Like, it's out of sync, and then it's like, do we need that, like, micro level of versioning? Like, how important is that to the general users of the design system or even the maintainers? Not it's a good reference point, but it's not something that we should necessarily live by. Of like, you should be using button 2.3.5. Um, you should just be using like because it's like material design 2 and 3, right? Like which UI kit are you using? It could be as simple as that. So that's what we settled on, which was way easier. But we never got to actually, I don't know, using versions or referencing versions.
It's yeah, it's like an area that I know I've gone too heavy into trying to figure. I think because what it usually comes down to is like what is the reason behind having versioning, right? And the reason behind having versioning really comes down to this ephemeral concept of what is the source of truth. Um, and then it's like I think it's almost like you need to take that step back and figure out, okay, well, what should be the source of truth? And I think that like that is still something that, well, I mean, it's still something that is just a contentious point of debate for everybody at it, like even at a high level of like the code should be source of truth, the design should be source of truth, the documentation should be source of truth. Um, because like that is ultimately like what you're trying to achieve with version, right? Like there's
Yeah.
nothing else that you would be trying to achieve. Am I missing something?
No, I think that is, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's really trying to figure out like what's the accurate reference point. Um,
Yeah.
and the way we wanted to use versioning is that because we were an enterprise company with like several legacy products in various states, um, they would, they might not get the latest version, but we can then say, well, they're not getting version 5, they're getting version 4. And that way, the idea was that when stakeholders are like, "Why do things not look the same?" Um, we can say, "No, like this old product, which is not getting, it's just like keep the lights on mode, it's only gonna get version 4. They're not gonna get version 5." And that way you can focus like on your evolving product, saying like they're gonna get the latest version, they're gonna get version 5. And that was the idea of to like point them to the correct source of truth. That way people aren't going like, why do our products not look the same? Why aren't they using all the latest stuff, right? Like it was helpful in managing a large suite of products,
And I
which
think
might not
that
be
like
everyone's case, right? So,
yeah, but I do think it is relatively, especially the bigger the company you're in, that is like a pretty and almost like the amount of product teams and products that you're supporting as a design system, which I don't know, from what I hear from folks that we talk to, like that is definitely more and more the case these days of like design systems are being implemented for folks who, you know, one of the big cases is obviously if you have a lot of different products to manage or a different like um yeah, different outputs. Products is the right word, right? Services, whatever it is.
yeah.
Um and so yeah, so like and that is the the realistic state of affairs where it's like not everything is going to be built off of the same one. I think when it comes to like versioning, I think you're right. Like it's keeping it as simple as possible is like one of the keys. And actually the important thing is just around having um consistency across the different aspects and having somewhere that is, I don't know, the way that I see it at least, and this golden sort of standard of where we should be trying to aim for is that um, we should have a place that we know we can look for so that you know like what version is the right version for that particular thing, which is
Yep.
probably the documentation. Like it makes
Yeah.
sense that it would be the documentation, um, because the documentation is the place that should be, highlighting, okay, well, this is, this is currently the state of affairs, and even potentially this is what is, I don't know, what is coming up in the future, or like what the past is. I don't necessarily think that like I don't know. It's really interesting because like we obviously have versioning in zero height. Um, from like a documentation point of view, like versioning. But is that what we're talking about? I don't think so.
I mean, it could be.
Like,
Like I guess like we like the documentation aspect is like releases, right? So those
yeah,
are like versions of the documentation and keep snapshots of it. Um, but you could use that as a reference, like, you can call it material 3 and then have that as the release, and then you can do, like, 3.1 and 3.2 as your releases. Um,
But I kind of feel like that isn't the I don't know. It almost feels like that isn't the thing that people should be worrying about when it comes to versions. I think I'm talking myself into circles here. Um,
it's confusing. I think that's the thing is, like, I think the idea, the theme is just to keep it simple, right? And then maybe find a place where everyone can agree on, like, where, like, the version is kept, right? I guess the understanding of the version is found maybe.
it's
Um,
documenting where, like, documenting the information behind the version. Like, what
yeah.
I think that's the thing. It's like it's understanding, as I said, it's understanding the need for the version, like the need for why you'd need to know what the version is. Um, and so I think that's and I don't think that is like a trivial thing to be to manage like as a team. Um, I do think that that's something where, if you are using documentation, and so like an example using zeroheight, like using things like status tags as your way of doing it, because I think one of the, and maybe it's more around like how we currently do releases in zeroheight. Um, like I don't think it is particularly great for versioning purely because of what we were talking about before around the fact that it's like um the reality of a situation is that your entire system probably won't be sitting on a particular like version of the code and version of the design. It'll probably be pretty fragmented across both, right? Um, and so actually what it is more, I think what's more important when it comes to that kind of stuff is like making sure that that information is surfaced at like a component or pattern level. Um, Instead of like just, I don't know, sitting doggedly of like, well, we can't really put the information out around like what version we're trying to hit because we're waiting to have everything on a single page so that we can do the release of the documentation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Um,
But I
but
I
yeah,
think it's, like, thinking about it, like, major versions versus, like, minor. Um, but I think the idea is, like, to know what you're gonna reference as, so think of, like, material 2 and 3, right?
yeah,
Like, you can easily say, "Oh, go to material 3 now." Um, and then not have everyone pay attention to all the details of all the different versions of all the pieces, because that will just make people crazy. I think it's good reference if you have to reference something from, um, if you're a maintainer, but I
yeah.
think, like, it just complicates things, which is already sometimes complicated for people to use a design system. So you
I
don't
think
want them to get more confused.
I think this is where like I get caught up in circles and caught up in knots with this is like um no, I completely lost that train of thought. Never mind. That's for
I mean,
the
maybe you
editor
don't
to.
version, right? And then you just say,
Yeah.
just go to the documentation page. That's where you're gonna find the latest link to Storybook or the latest component in
Well,
Figma or
actually,
whatever.
that's what I was going to bring up is like, do you think it's important to actually have all like like historical versioning available to the user of the design system, or even like the contributor? Like, how important do you think it is to be able to effectively like go back and sort of check previous versions or have be able to reference previous versions?
I don't
Because I
think
think a
it's
lot of
that
people,
important,
yeah, like,
it
but I feel like a lot of people want that,
and then
and
I'd have to ask, like, why? Like,
yeah,
just because you can get it, does it mean that you need it? Um,
yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, I actually think that like keeping, it's why I don't know, stable and like beta, right? Like I don't know, even like deprecated stable beta, like as um uh sort of rolling ways of thinking about versioning from like a user point of view, I think is probably just the max level that you need. Um, and I don't know, there's probably some value in like being able to dive into like um, past examples or whatever. Um, to understand like context sometimes for probably for the people who like maintain, but like I do think that like keeping it as simple as possible for the users and keeping it like really basic is probably like going to satisfy the needs of, I don't know, 99% of people.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I as a if I was using a design system, I don't need to know every single iteration of a button component. Like,
Yeah.
I just want to know which one's the latest.
So
Um,
so on that, like
yeah.
what point do you think people should actually even worry about versioning?
You know, I kind of thought versioning was a good idea, and then and now I'm like, maybe you shouldn't even bother because I I don't know. I think it's handy if you're trying to scale your design system. So if you're not trying to scale, right? Like if you're like, okay, we've got to unify all the products to make it look like, then you probably want to do some versioning. Just to say like, these 10 products are going to get the new system. These old, I don't know, DOS based apps are not getting a design
Things that
system.
still use
Um,
IE6, yeah.
yeah. So like, or they're going to get like a very old and we're not going to move forward with that. I think that's kind of like where I was bought in, but like I think it's just like if you just need to make a design system that people can use and just that call it that. And I don't think anyone's going to think twice about what version it is. Um, I think if the devs need to keep track of versions in terms of like, pull requests and stuff and like code iterations, like that's fine, but like that doesn't really need to involve designers or content people.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm very curious to see what people think who are listening, especially the folks who are listening live. So I think like G just pointed out here in the chat. So the idea of having major versions get synced. So I'm guessing synced fully across like design, documentation, and code. So examples of like Material 2 versus Material 3, and needs like synced effort in making sure that everything is aligned on major versions. And then minor changes basically only get tracked on the code side. And then like, yeah, like design components can be tracked as delivered in build 1.3.0 or planned for build 1.3.1. Like, I think that's probably good. It's almost like obfuscating the minor versions so it's only the people who really need to know about those things and almost like tracking them in a separate area. I actually think that's a really good way to do it. Um,
Yeah.
I think the bigger question there is actually more around what is a major version. Um, and like how often you should be releasing major versions, because my gut feel is that actually effective design systems teams should probably not be releasing major versions particularly often, like maybe once a year, maybe even less than that. Which I don't know if that would horrify some people, but
Yeah, I think it's like, if there's obviously like a rebrand or something,
yeah.
uh, or I guess like and then I can think of like maybe if you changed a tool, like if you switched a tool and had to rebuild new components, but that might not the everything might look the same and the code wouldn't be affected if you change the design tool. So maybe
Yeah,
that's
or
like a
similarly on the other side,
yeah.
John just pointed
Yeah.
out, like having major, so if you change your code base, so like there's actually no significant change to the design, but everything has to be re-engineered, then obviously would probably warrant a major version. But then I don't know, like it's interesting because it's like so like John's suggesting that they've actually decided to have completely independent versioning and design coded documentation, which I don't necessarily think is a bad idea. I think the important thing there is actually just documenting it and making sure it is documented, and enough teams don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Um oh well,
And
it
that's why
seems
I
like
think
we're
if you
completely
went
in
to your
agreement on this.
um I because I
I
think
wanted
that's
to
the thing is
spice it.
like if you go to, like, your documentation and use that as a launch pad of, like, this is where you go for the latest code components and the design libraries, then you don't need to know those, like, tinier versions, and you might not even need versioning because you just go to the site. I don't know.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I think like G's brought up again the like Figma redesign as a good example of this, like not releasing new versions of their like UI for years and then out of the blue releasing new UI and pissing off everyone. But it's interesting because it's like I don't because I've actually find the way that they've like rolled that out as an interesting because they are clearly currently maintaining two versions of their design system because they've still got. I mean, I'm still on UI 2, which I'm annoyed about because I'd really like UI 3. Uh, but I think I'm one of the only ones who would really like UI 3. But uh, um, yeah, I it's an I think this is more of like a philosophical like product question around like is it better to iteratively change your design over a period of time or better to do it all at a big, which I suppose is going back to like the major release concept, um or should it be something where you iterate and then like say at some point this is our milestone, this is new major release.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it really I think the thing is, like, everyone just needs to keep in mind, like, make it as simple as possible for everyone and not overcomplicate things.
Yeah,
Like, so we know that there is a versioning naming convention. We don't need to use it if it doesn't suit us, right?
yeah.
Um, but Brianna asks, how do you handle release notes in relation to versions when they are all separate and have different numbers?
um I'm I think I'm gonna be I don't know if this is controversial or not. It's probably not. Um I actually think that like getting caught up in tying release notes to a particular like release number is I don't know. I think that the important thing there is making sure that the release notes are visible and dated. Like that is literally the only thing that I care about. I want to know when the change happened and what the change is. Um, and then I mean you can have that stuff behind the scenes, but like I don't necessarily think that it's like important to surface that. Like if I think I don't know, if I think of I suppose the only important thing is to like be able to reference, but even then if you're referencing unless you're literally making like 20 changes within one day, and like individually messaging about each of those changes, like you somehow have you're the one company in the world that has a design systems team of 200 people, um then like I can't see I don't know many places that you wouldn't just be able to easily reference based off of the date and the change in question.
Yeah. Because we had release notes and, like, for especially, like, our storybook instance, there would be, like, a version and then the date, and
Yeah,
we would always reference the date because we were like, "When was this? Oh, 2
yeah.
weeks ago? Okay." Right? Like, yeah.
And I do think that that's actually really important. I think that it's one thing with versioning that is really important is like on that like release notes I think are essential. We talk a lot about communication and community and like building all of that, and it's that is like one of the core pillars of like how you communicate changes to your design system is your release notes. So it's like I think it's like again it's like making sure that that information is digestible and understandable, and I think that the most important thing there is date, what's changed, um ideally with like some kind of contextual link out to like what's changed. um I don't think there's anything else that's like super needed.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Cool. I think
I don't
basically I just sorry to cut you off there. Did you have a final point to make?
No, I just think I'm so confused now. I don't think I helped anything or anyone. I'm like, "Huh, I really was behind this versioning, and now I think I've talked myself out of it."
we came into this both thinking. Well, actually, I don't think I had any strong opinions about versioning when I came into this, but clearly I've had more than I thought. Um, that we came in thinking that we knew what we were talking about, and it turns out that we just have more questions than we came in with. So I think that we probably need to go away and have a think about this and revisit versioning at another point. But we'd really love to hear from other people what you think about versioning and whether what we're talking about is complete bullcrap. Um, so if you are interested in giving us some feedback and letting us know what you think about how we should be versioning design systems, then please fire them across to us. You can either do that on the Zero Slack community at zeroheight.com/Slack, or you can email us directly if you want to, community@zeroheight.com, or hit us up on X. We're both on X, right? Um,
Yep.
at Lurk Movie, at Soy Sauce Chin, or at Zero Height. And other than that, I suppose we're just going to put a pin in versioning for the moment. We do really need to leave X at some point. It is a dumpster fire of a place. Um, that's being left in the podcast because everybody should be aware of that. But then where else do we hang out? LinkedIn. Um, I
That's where
think
all the cool kids are.
that's where all the cool
I don't
kids are.
know.
Threads. Nobody's actually on Threads. Um, thanks very much for joining today. That's it. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. What's the topic in 2 weeks' time?
Oh, man. Let's
You
see
should
if I
know this.
can
We can just edit out the
why
awkward silence.
why do we need to care more about patterns?
This is one that I am very opinionated about, so I'm looking forward to it. Uh,
I'm nervous I'm gonna talk myself out of it.
okay, so we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with that. And until then, see you next time.